Well, Dane, I can use my journalistic skills to deduce that you have traded in the hotel for your home office, which must mean that the All-Star Game circuit has concluded. How were your travels? And I got to imagine it's always easier to do this from home base rather than, setting your laptop up on the hotel room microwave so you can podcast remote.
Right. And this is also the time of year where I question my life choices to live where I do. I landed in Cleveland Thursday night. It was -6 degrees without the wind chill. First thing I did, I hit that auto start to my truck on the app, get out to the parking lot, just buried in snow. I'll send you a picture. So I love my scouting trips. I love them. But between the ice in Dallas, the cold temps in Mobile, because it was chilly sitting there during practice, and then Planet Hoth waiting for me when I got back home, I am more than happy to be back at home base now for a few weeks before hitting the road and going to the combine. But yeah, now it's kind of like a tag team. Tag, you're your turn to travel now.
Yeah, fortunately, I get to travel to California for the Super
Little
Bowl, where
different, yeah.
it's actually warm out there. That's my saving grace this week has been that everything is cold. Like even Florida froze over the weekend, so it's not like you could have escaped it. But yeah, hopefully, I think the Bay will be a nice change of pace. But before we worry about the Super Bowl, we are publishing this a day early as the conclusion to this early part of the draft cycle. We got so much Seahawks Patriots content coming to the feed as the week goes. But right now, let's talk about the real game that matters, which was the actual Senior Bowl on Saturday afternoon. We previewed it earlier in the week heading into the game. Coming out of it, I thought it would be fun to just hit on guys that jumped out during the game and also guys that just had a good week of practice. You wrote a story about it for theathletic.com. Just if you want to call them winners, if you want to call them risers, I don't really care how we categorize it, but guys that had a nice week in Mobile and specifically guys that capped it off with a nice day on Saturday at the actual game. This time I am going to start in the cliche place because it was nice to see Garrett Nussmeier on Saturday afternoon, Dane, looking like the guy that I remember. I mean, we had so many conversations before his season was shut down of like, okay, well, LSU says he's healthy and he says he's healthy, but this does not look like the guy that I remember. Saturday at the Senior Bowl, and granted, it's a small sample size. I get that. He completed 5 of 8 passes for 57 yards, but he looked more like the guy we were excited about heading into 2025, and that was nice to see.
What a difference it makes when you're talking about a guy at full health compared to what we saw from Nussmeier during the fall. And we know what they said during the season, but I mean, Garrett was very transparent, talking to him throughout the week about it just didn't feel right. He had the abdominal injury in August, and then he tried to play through it, and he re-injured it basically multiple times, which you just look at a quarterback and the way he moves, his throwing motion, working off platform, all these different movements, and no wonder, he re-injured it multiple times because of just what it takes to play the position. And then he just got to a point where he had to shut it down. And so clearly he wasn't healthy all season. And that's not just a hall pass and say, well, we'll just wave away the season. But I am, watching him the senior film, there were a lot of bad habits that he picked up from the injury where he wasn't planting his feet in his delivery. He wasn't using his core to make these throws. Just a lot of mechanical things that were off and different. And that really affected not his decision making, but the placement of the throws and exactly the zip that he was putting on some of these throws. So seeing him in live action, in practice and then the game was awesome. Just to see it look more like that 2024 version that was getting first round grades from NFL teams. So I don't think he was the quote unquote winner of the week from the quarterback position. He was the most consistent. I don't think any of these quarterbacks were amazing. It's kind of like last year where you kind of had a stretch to come up with a winner. And I remember for me, I think it was Tyler Shuck last year who kind of did the best, but no one really stood out in a big way. It's kind of like that this year, but Nussmeier clearly was the most consistent quarterback. He wasn't without some misfires here and there, but was the most consistent of the group. And I think that the game was kind of an exclamation point on that with the way he played. Yeah, he had the interception, but it was a perfect throw to the tight end that went through his hands.
Don't talk to me about that interception.
I
It
know.
made me so mad because it was his best throw of the day, and it just
Yeah.
clanged off of the Wyoming tight end's hands. John Michael Gillenborg, and I was like, "Come, we're trying to resuscitate Ness's stock here, John Michael, and this is not helping."
Altmaier had one of those too. Kaczmarek just went through his hands, and so yeah, the not all of the receivers and tight ends were helping out the quarterbacks, and that was true during the week as well. But yeah, it was just good to see Nussmeier back out there. I don't think that. So okay, let's shift to what does this mean for Nussmeier moving forward. I don't think that it's okay. Let's put him in first round mocks now. Like I don't think we're talking about that. But I do think that anywhere on day 2 is now a realistic spot. Like for me, I feel better. I went in thinking I would have him Nussmeier in the 3rd round. Now I feel even better about that now, and I don't think I'm gonna move him up even more. So I have a 3rd round grade on him. I think that, um, like you think about where Jacoby Brissett was drafted. You think about Mason Rudolph, where he was drafted. Davis Mills, like all these guys were mid 3rd round picks, and they went on to be primarily backups who could win games if from time to time if they needed to. I think that's kind of what Garrett Nussmeier is. Now, maybe a team that's desperate for a quarterback feels even higher than that, and they take him in the Tyler Shuck range, which is, right around pick 40 or so. I think that's possible, but I see him as more of that 3rd round player who can come in and he can be a high level backup, a guy that brings value to quarterback meetings. And to me, that's the most likely outcome. But based on how he performed this week, you don't want to shut the door on maybe being potentially more than that.
It's easy because it was just last year, but I just think Tyler Shuck is such an obvious comp for Garrett Nussmeier, from performing well in this situation to it's not as old as Tyler, but an older prospect. He turns 24 in a month. He was in college for quite some time. And yeah, I would hesitate to say that he's jumping into the first round conversations just because of 4 nice days of practice, but I have to believe that anywhere on day 2 is on the table. And look, if we get to April and the league insiders of the world are tweeting out cryptic things about, oh, don't be so surprised if this guy's name gets called a lot earlier than you think, because this coaching staff really loves him. And I absolutely okay, so if you're not blown away by what you saw at the Senior Bowl, this Garrett Nussmeier just strikes me as somebody who's going to get asked to do private workouts galore, where teams that might need a quarterback who want to get a closer look at him are going to fly to Baton Rouge or have him go to them and put him through the gamut. And do I think he'll be a first round pick? Not really, but I think it's on the table. And that sounded crazy heading into Senior Bowl week. And if not first round, then like I said, Tyler Shuck just feels like a very fair starting point, where it's like starting on day 2 all the way up until, pick 90, pick 100, anywhere in that range. I know it's a wide range, but late Thursday to early Friday would be my guess. And we'll see how the next few months change that as teams try to get a closer look at him.
I think that, obviously quarterback 1 is set in stone. That's done. Quarterback 2 and 3, I think, are up for grabs. And I think it's between those 2 players, Ty Simpson from Alabama, Garrett Nussmeier from LSU. And again, we're speaking generally because every team's going to have their own order and how they stack these guys. But from a general point of view, I think it's those 2 guys duking it out for 2 and 3. And then, after that, we can talk about the Carson Becks and the Drew Allers and the Klubniks and Talon Greens and all the rest of the guys. But I think that, day 2, we're talking about those quarterbacks, Ty Simpson, Garrett Nussmeier. I think that's teams are going to try and figure them out and figure out, okay, what's the ceiling here? Like, we know you can be backups, but what's your ceiling for us, for our franchise? And the fact that this is just a weak quarterback class is going to help those 2 players, because teams are gonna say like, do we really want to wait till the third round to get him, or should we just take him now in the second? And so that'll be interesting to see how that evolves between now and April when things really start to ramp up with the quarterback discussion.
Garrett is a situation where I'm more than happy to put my bias on the table. I've followed him for a long time. I knew who he was when I covered the Cowboys and his dad worked for the Cowboys. He went to LSU. He waited his turn for a long time. And I'm happy we can have these conversations because we had to take it off the table in like October because he just didn't look right. And then he eventually gets shut down for the season. You have no idea what that means for his future. So wherever he gets drafted, I'm just happy we can pick these conversations back up. And he has some degree of control. He already put his best foot forward in Mobile, in my opinion. And now over the course of the next 2-3 months, you can go about getting somebody to fall in love with you. And the fact that he's back in that spot, which is, it's not where we expected him to be because we had high expectations for the 2025 season, but it's just more in line with what we were hoping for. I'm happy he gets to have that back and be part of the normal course of the draft process. It was exciting to see him, like I said, in the Senior Bowl look like the quarterback that I remember watching over the last couple of years.
You could tell he was having fun this week in practice, in the games, just being out there, feeling more like himself. Like you could just see it, and it showed in the way he played.
All right, we were bound to go long on quarterback, but we're gonna go through every single position. We'll spend, we'll hit everything. I don't know if we're gonna go as deep on every position as we did on quarterback, but let's just run through this thing. And another guy that had a nice Saturday, Dane, and I don't make the beast like you, so I'm catching up to your encyclopedic knowledge. But so Jadyn Ott of Oklahoma scores a touchdown. He finishes with 42 rushing yards in the Senior Bowl. You mentioned him in your risers list, and I'm watching the broadcast, and people point out, oh, this guy was at Cal, and he was at Oklahoma, and he basically didn't have a 2025 season. I mean, he just barely touched the ball. And it immediately jogged my memory of watching the Fernando Mendoza Cal Golden Bears, and Jadyn Ott was a badass for Cal. I mean, he had 3,300 scrimmage yards over the course of 3 years at Cal. He had a 1,300-yard rushing season a couple years ago. He was absolutely on my radar at one point during his college career, and he goes to OU and just falls off the map. So I'm very intrigued by the week that he had and what it could mean and how NFL evaluators are going to parse through his talent versus the fact that he just could not get the football at Oklahoma over the second half of last season.
Yeah, it's really interesting. And I mean, he himself called it his season like kind of a mystery. And he was banged up a lot at Cal. I think we just kind of assumed it was something similar at OU, and that was one of the big reasons. But teams are going to be working overtime to figure that out and make sure they have a firm grasp on why he didn't kind of live up to the potential, finishing out at Cal and then at Oklahoma, because that was a prime opportunity for him to kind of have a breakout as a senior, and it just never happened. But I want to give him credit for competing this week and what he did. I mean, when I watch running backs at the Senior Bowl, it's really hard to stand out because in the practice setting. But I want to see you in pass protection. I want to see you. Can you stuff some linebackers? Can you hold your own and ride the bull? And he did that consistently. And that's why, for me, he got kind of the winners of the running back because of the way he held up in pass protection. He caught the ball well as well, also, but it was the way he blocked. And for a guy that's right around 200 pounds, not the biggest guy, his ability to get underneath defenders and get his hands on them, keep them blocked, that really stood out. And so Jadyn Ott, Kaelon Black, which awesome. He was, I think, the only Indiana player to be at the game. So you win a national title, and a lot of guys decided not to go to the Senior Bowl, and I understand it completely.
They had a parade in Bloomington, all right? They had stuff going on.
16-game season, like that's a lot to pick up and then just go to Alabama and play an all-star game. So I get it why Surratt and those guys did not play in the Senior Bowl. But credit to Kaelon Black, who went and had a pretty good week himself, and he's kind of just the bow on top of a tremendous last 6 months for him. Mike Washington from Arkansas had a good week too. So yeah, the running backs, while it's hard to stand out, I thought a couple of them really did a nice job.
I'm glad you mentioned Washington and Black. We're not judging the guys that didn't go, but that's a real ball is life sort of thing, though. Like when you get done with your season and 10 days later, you're bowing guys up in Mobile at the Senior Bowl. I'm sure that's going to play well with NFL evaluators.
And that was important for him because like in the offseason, I remember talking to a scout in the summer about going through Indiana's roster and brought up Kaelon Black, and the scout brought up like how he was kind of trying to think the exact words he used, but it was like he was a little mopey with the way that he because he came over from James Madison to Indiana and didn't get the ball much last year, and so he was kind of just not in a good place because he didn't think that the 2024 season went the way that he wanted, and that was reflected, and scouts took notice of that. But credit to him for having the senior year that he did, over 1,000 yards, and he was so instrumental to that run Indiana had. He led the team in rushing against Ohio State, against Oregon, against Alabama, against Miami. Like the final 4 or 5 games that it was the final run to the national title game, it was Kaelon Black who really carried that team in terms of the ground game. And then to go to the Senior Bowl and do what he did, I give him a lot of credit.
I'm glad you brought up Washington too. I took note immediately when I saw his official Senior Bowl weigh-in is 6'2", 228. It's a big guy, and he runs like it. He had a fantastic run in the red zone in the game where he just carried the entire line of scrimmage like an extra 8 or 9 yards down toward the goal line. Very fun player. I'm excited to watch more of him. As far as receivers go, I think it's obvious if you followed Senior Bowl week, but Malachi Fields of Notre Dame feels like he kind of stole the show. Is there anything you wanted to highlight there, or anybody else you wanted to give some love to?
Fields had the catch of the week, obviously, that Taylon Green moonshot that Fields is able to track, correct his route, and come down with that diving fingertip grab. Malachi Fields is a big guy, and to see him move in person, I think really gave a little more perspective on just how impressive he is. It's not just long striding speed that he builds up, it's short area quickness. It's the ability to snap off a route. And so I think for Malachi Fields, a lot of check marks in his scouting report of what scouts wanted to see this week. I thought Kevin Coleman from Missouri, who former top recruit, did a really nice job catching everything thrown his way, created some separation. I think he's going to be a really solid mid-round pick. Josh Cameron from Baylor, same type of thing. And he's built 225, and you feel him with the way he plays through contact at the catch point. And then he's got a little bit of juice after the catch. Reggie Virgil from Texas Tech, want to give him a shout out for the way he played. 6'4", really lean, but man, he is so quick in his releases, and then he builds up his speed in a really fast way, so he can win vertically, create that vertical separation. Reggie Virgil is a guy that his special teams ability, I think, is gonna help him as well. So transfer from Miami of Ohio this past year at Texas Tech was productive for them, and now I think he's got a chance to at least be included in that top 100 conversation. Reggie Virgil helped himself, and then have to include Tyren Montgomery from John Carroll, the D3 standout.
You said Ty Montgomery, and I had like flashback. I was like, "Whoa, are we at the 2016 Senior Bowl right now?"
Yeah, former Stanford great.
Out of John Carroll,
Tyren Montgomery, who he's an older guy, he's got a crazy background, but the best compliment I can give is he did not look like he was a non-Division I athlete out there. I mean, his ability to create space in his routes, and he kind of wore down towards the end of the week, had a few drops on day 3 of practice, but his first 2 days of practice were awesome.
I was really excited to see who you highlighted at tight end. And that would be Nate Boerkircher out of Texas A&M, who I think we talked about him when we just talked about the amount of talent on Texas A&M's roster. Yeah. But a guy that has jumped out to me when I've watched A&M games and watched A&M tape just because of his blocking ability and his strength and the power that he plays with. And like many college tight ends, his stats are not going to look impressive when you look him up. But that's playing tight end in college, and at a time where it really feels like NFL teams are looking for tight ends who can block and then come along as receivers later. Nate Boerkircher fits that description to me, where it's like, all right, he might not be the most accomplished receiver heading into the NFL, but if I can get him on the field in multiple tight end sets and count on him as a blocker, the rest of that stuff can come along. And so it was fun for me to read your blurb on him.
Well, and Boerkircher's, he was tough to figure out because he was a walk-on at Nebraska, played there 5 years, and had a total of, like, I don't know, 19 catches in 5 years. Like, it's like, okay, why did it take till now for him to really produce? And even at Texas A&M, it's not like he was, a guy that you would consider a weapon, but he was a solid player who just is kind of good across the board. He is not going to blow you away with the speed, but he can leverage his routes and give the quarterback windows. As a blocker, he does a nice job with his pad level and staying square and really driving his legs. And so that showed this week. So, this is a deep tight end group where, at the top you've got Sadiq, and then it's okay, who's next? Is it Max Clare from Ohio State, Eli Stowers from Vanderbilt, neither of whom were there at the Senior Bowl. But then after that, it's like, okay, what's the order going to be? Because there's a lot of candidates. This is a deep tight end class, and I thought Boerkircher helped himself in terms of getting towards the top of that next tier of tight ends that you're going to consider somewhere in the 3rd to 5th round range.
I think Jackson Hawes is just going to have a lot of teams looking for those sorts of guys, even if they're not sexy draft picks. But he's definitely one of my early candidates for that role.
Yeah, Cuevas from Alabama, Kazmarek from Ohio State. Yeah, I mean, there's going to be a lot of tight ends that should, kick up, like a 0.5% over to Hawes for helping out a little bit in the process.
Let's talk about offensive line briefly. I get it. I understand the hype because the clips going around social media, the highlight from Senior Bowl Saturday of Max Iheanachor, the Arizona State offensive tackle. I understand why people are talking about him coming out of this week. My question for you is this a situation where, and not to take credit away from him, but are people looking for prospects to get excited about at offensive tackle because it's not a very impressive class? Because that's what it feels like to me, where this guy can go to the Senior Bowl, kick ass for a few days. You can find good clips of him on tape playing against the Texas Techs of the world, playing against David Bailey and Romello Height and holding his own. It feels like people are looking for somebody to get excited about in an otherwise disappointing class.
Well, both things can be true, right? Where he did play well this week, wasn't perfect, especially in the team portion of practice, where he had his share of losses. But you see the highlights, and when he plays at his best and his hands are on time, it looks pretty good. This is a 325-pound athlete who is really coordinated in his movements. He stays balanced at contact. But he's been playing football for like 5 years. Like he was. He's got a crazy background, didn't play football in high school. It wasn't until the JUCO level. And so he's come along in a short time. But I still think that as well as he played, I don't think this is a player you're going to put into your starting right tackle role on day one and expect him to hold up and everything's going to go, swimmingly. Like, I just don't think that's in the immediate future for him. Now, do I think maybe at some point during his rookie year could he compete for starting snaps? Yeah, I think that's a possibility. But you're drafting him for more of what he's going to give you over the life of the rookie contract and not what he's going to do immediately from day one. And so it was good to see him kind of live up to the potential during the week in Mobile, because I liked him a ton over the summer. He was in my early top 50 back in August, so it's not like he came out of nowhere, but he had a solid senior year. It wasn't amazing. It wasn't below average. It was solid. And at the Senior Bowl, it kind of showed what he could do. But again, his awareness, his hands, they're still up and down because he's still figuring things out. And that's okay. You don't need a guy to be a polished, finished product at this point of their development, especially with his background. But I think it's important context to remember when we figure out, okay, where is he going to be drafted? Because it's not like you immediately put him in the first round because of some of the areas where he still needs a lot of work. But at a certain point in the second round, he absolutely might be worth it for a team looking at the long term of their roster in 2027 and beyond, and saying we want to develop a guy like this. And so he helped himself this week.
It's the classic case, though. I'm interested to see how that goes because I understand everything you just said, but if somebody sees the long-term vision with him and it's a premium position where there just aren't that many guys that size who can do that stuff, maybe it inflates his draft stock a little bit. But that's definitely a name to know. I would say behind Nussmeier and some of the more, maybe a couple edge rushers, which we'll get to, definitely one of the short list names to know coming out of the Senior Bowl.
Yeah, and like you were saying, I think that part of it is just it wasn't a good offensive line group, and I think that also inflated the defensive line that we'll talk about in a second, where all the talk was about the defensive line, which some of it was warranted, but some of it was just, I think, a really good defensive line picking on a not so great offensive line.
Before we get to those guys, anybody on the interior offensive line you want to highlight?
Yeah, I mean, Jalen Farmer from Kentucky, I thought stepped in at guard and did a nice job. The Florida center, Jake Slaughter, did a nice job. All these guys had their share of losses, but I thought that they came back battling and had their share of wins as well. Jennings Dunker from Iowa, who, was a feel-good story throughout the week because, he's got a mullet and, he's got this long red hair and, North Dakota State's got one every year and now it's Iowa's got one this year. And like, I get it, but he's also a pretty good player. I don't see him staying out at tackle, even though he had some good tackle reps. He's just too stiff to stay out there at tackle. But I think inside a guard, he'll be a solid player.
All right. As promised, we are going to get to what was a loaded defensive front. It was a big week for defensive linemen, edge rushers in particular. Maybe some of that was because they were picking on a lesser offensive tackle group a little bit. But before we get into the fair aspect of it, I'm just going to confirm my priors. I've unabashedly loved Zion Young during this entire show, like from the going back to the beginning of the season. And lo and behold, he was kicking ass again on Saturday afternoon. I feel like he jumped out every third snap. He had a fumble recovery early in the game. He had a couple TFLs. He was around the quarterback incessantly. And I remember we talked about it. I think teams are going to have to do some digging on his off-field history, particularly going back to his time at Michigan State. But what a fun player in terms of rushing the passer. I thought he was outstanding in the Senior Bowl.
I mean, he's how you want a defensive end to look. He's over 6'5", he's over 260 pounds, 33.5-inch arms. So, he looks like a pro. He looks like Michael Clemens. He looks like some of these guys that you see on Sundays. And now he's not going to be a pure speed guy where it's just get off, cornering speed, bend flat into the quarterback. Like, that's just not his game. But he's long, he's strong, and man, he's determined. Like, the way he uses his hands, the way he can set up some moves, it just feel like it started to blossom this year for him as a senior, and that continued during Senior Bowl week. So you're looking for a guy that's going to set a firm edge in the run game. He's going to have the way that he uses the heavy hands and the strength and the length to open pathways to the pocket. That's what he brings, and that's what he showed throughout the week of practice.
Another guy that I didn't know as much about who definitely flashed would be Keyron Crawford out of Auburn, who I believe you highlighted in your winner's article as well. Had a really nice swim move to sack Diego Pavia during the game. Tell me a little bit more, because he definitely, other than the fact that he played at Auburn, which again, that Auburn team just had so many NFL prospects for how not very good at football they were in 2025. But what else do I need to know about him?
Yeah, and I think that obviously all the eyes were on Keldrick Falk this year at Auburn, but it was hard to talk to a scout about Falk without them bringing up Crawford. And I think that obviously that says a lot about him and the way that he was able to jump out this year. He was a little bit undersized, and but he told scouts, "I'll get over 250. I'll be over 250." And well, he came out at 251 for the Senior Bowl, which is what you want to see. The frame's impressive because, I mean, in terms of the way I wish I looked at the beach, like six pack, balled up,
You and me
muscles.
both, buddy.
Yeah, I mean, look, rocked up, man. That's what you want it to look like. And so passes the eye test when you're just looking at him, and then the way he plays, he backs it up. I mean, he flies off the edge. He doesn't have the longest arms in the world, so he does feel undersized at times. But man, the effort is nonstop. He competes his butt off, and I think that just the way he goes about his business and the way that he competes is something that's going to speak directly to NFL teams and defensive coordinators. So yeah, I think that he's helped himself all year, and it didn't stop at the Senior Bowl in terms of proving himself to be somewhere in the top 4 rounds.
With apologies to the ACC champion Duke Blue Devils, I just didn't watch a lot of Duke football this year, so this is going to be a theme for the rest of this show. Duke players who jumped out at me, and one of those was Vincent Anthony, which, okay, 6'5", 246 pounds, looked very impressive. But the other part of this that made me laugh really hard is when I found out he had 7.5 sacks this year. 3 of those came in one game against Luke Altmaier. And so, of course, he gets into the Senior Bowl and sacks Luke Altmaier, who must have been like, Jesus Christ, this guy again?
Yeah, and Anthony's. I struggle with him, to be honest with you. Like he flashed during the week of practice, no doubt. But just standing next to him during practice, like he's just a very lean guy, like tall, long, but just very little definition on his body. And so you do worry about, okay, the mediocre play strength. How is that going to hold up in the NFL, especially when he tries to go speed to power. He is a little tight, I think. So I think it's going to be tougher for him to win the corner consistently in the NFL. But and he was also a guy that a lot of offsides, a lot of snap infractions where just he needs to be a little bit better there. But that's kind of okay. Let's get the bad stuff out of the way first. But I think that when he does when he does time up the snap well, he has those long strides. He can win the corner. He can force quarterback to move his feet. He's very active with his hands. And so whether it's a chop, a swat, he can discard the hands of blockers, soften the edges, and that helps him detach from blockers as well. So I think he's just a guy that because he's a 4-year starter. I remember talking to, like 3 years ago, his name came up as like, oh, watch for this guy, because he kind of forced his way onto the field as a true freshman. Just a really easygoing guy. Like if he wanted to, he could probably run for mayor in Durham and win. Like he's just really beloved in that community, and he's gonna be. I think best case for him is probably like an Arden Key type of NFL career where it's you're a little specialized in what you do, but I think there's a right role for you out there.
Hey, Arden Key is still playing 8 years later. We'll take that every single time. Anybody else? I know we highlighted LT Overton and TJ Parker and Derrick Moore heading into the Senior Bowl, or any other edge guys you wanted to highlight coming out.
All those guys had win. I mean, Derrick Moore winning with power. He's one of the more just well-rounded players in this draft at that position, in terms of playing the edge, in terms of being able to have some juice to get to the quarterback. TJ Parker helped himself. He's trying to get into that first round. He certainly didn't hurt those chances. That long arm that he plays with is legit. And so I thought TJ Parker, who just did not have the season that a lot of us were thinking he would, for him to bounce back this week was great. Tucker from Western Michigan, teams are trying to figure him out. Didn't really get much play Houston, but then he goes to Western Michigan and just blows up. And so he brought the most juice of the group in terms of the way he carries himself, just the energy he brings, but then also that get off and some of the explosiveness. And so I don't think that, Tucker is not going to be a top 100 guy, but I could see him being drafted in the 5th, 6th round. And then you look up, 2 years from now and he's, 11th in the league in sacks or something like that as a designated pass rusher. So yeah, Tucker's definitely a name to know. Romello Height was solid. Gabe Akis was solid. So yeah, we could talk for a long time just about these defensive ends that put on a show during the week.
That's Nadame Tucker out of Western
Yes.
Michigan, for those of y'all following along. Good name to know. Defensive tackle, I'll try to stop gushing about Caleb Banks, although I did see him put just a filthy spin move on a guy midway through the Senior Bowl that just made me stop what I was doing. I think you said it heading into the week that guys his size just aren't supposed to move the way that he moves. And he looked like it, being able to get out there. I saw Lee Hunter out of Texas Tech had such a good week of practice that he stood on it and didn't play in the game, which I think is such a flex. Like, if you can just kick that much ass over the course of 3 days, it's like, no, I'm good. I don't need to risk my health in the game. So great weeks for those two guys. I did want to ask you, a guy you highlighted that I'm not or wasn't super familiar with heading into this was Rayshaun Benny out of Michigan.
Yeah. I think that it was like he was a really well-known recruit coming out of high school, and then he goes to Michigan and kind of, waited his time behind Mason Graham and Grant and those guys. And like his senior year was supposed to be his breakout. It's supposed to be, okay, this is why I'm going to be a top 100 pick. And I don't think he got there necessarily, but he still showed enough where you see the traits, you see the ability, get the Senior Bowl invite, and he was a hard guy to block all week, both individual one-on-ones, team drills. He did a really nice job just being impactful. And so it was quickness, it was hand strength, it was just finding different ways to defeat blocks and make it really hard to keep him blocked. So the balance through contact that he showed, man, he's a guy that I thought would be a really good value, like 5th round. I'm not sure he makes it that far after what he did this week, which is exactly what you're trying to do. So credit to Benny. I thought he got my top defensive tackle award. Now, Caleb Banks, I think, is going to be – Caleb Banks might be the first defensive tackle drafted, period, not just who was at the Senior Bowl. But Benny, I thought, was the most consistent practice to practice, snap to snap with what he did in Mobile.
All right, we are going to get to the back seven. You highlighted it early in the week after one day of practice, and it really felt like Kyle Lewis out of Pittsburgh stole the show for the week. I think it feels like a lot of people are hip to a really nice week of practice that he had in Mobile.
Yeah, and Kyle Lewis, I struggled with him coming into the week because he's undersized. There's no way around that. He's under 6 foot. He's 224 pounds. He's not a take-on player. And you watch the Pitt film, and you don't see a ton of man coverage. Like a lot of his impact plays came downhill as a blitzer or, beating blockers to the gap. And there's value in that. But when you project him to the NFL and, you question, okay, how does he take on contact? How does he work off blocks? And the Senior Bowl doesn't necessarily show that. And so the Senior Bowl this week was set up perfectly for Kyle Lewis to shine because it really accentuates his strengths, which is speed, quickness, playing really decisive, where he doesn't have to worry about contact. It's just make a play, go, and you see that anticipation, you see the athleticism. So I don't think it was a surprise that he really stood out both in coverage, one-on-ones against running backs and tight ends. But it was good to see because, again, you didn't see a ton of man coverage on his film at Pitt. So it was good to see him play, tight coverage against those guys one-on-ones. But the way that he showed up in team drills, the anticipation, the way that he would break up passes, he was shining throughout the week. And so that was good to see. Jacob Rodriguez from Texas Tech, he was a close second. He had a couple interceptions. It's amazing how the ball finds him. At a certain point, have to wonder, like, is he, uh, have a tipster giving him the plays early, because he has a feel for what the offense is trying to do, and then puts himself in position to go make a play. That was great to see. Brian Boettcher from Oregon was awesome. The physicality. Did you see before the game him getting into it with the Tennessee player?
Yes, I did.
That was
Bryce Boettcher. Yeah, he was
bizarre.
everywhere. He was
Yeah.
everywhere during the game as well,
Yeah, they'll
too.
take 10 tackles in the game. Like,
Yeah.
he's got a touch of insanity to him,
Good.
and that's exactly what you want from your linebackers. And
I
so
want
it's
my
just
linebackers to be like the most unhinged members of
yeah.
my team.
And he's a guy that, he plays linebacker the way he played center field for the Oregon baseball team, where it's aware. You see the awareness, you see the range. He's a Gold Glover. He didn't make any errors like the last 3 years at Oregon, and that shows in the way he plays football. So, yeah, I those three guys, Xavian Sorey from Arkansas, throw him in there as well. The defensive line kind of ruled the show, but the linebackers were kind of right behind them in terms of overall positional winners throughout the week.
It was Star Thomas out of Tennessee
That's
that
right.
Boettcher
Late call up, yeah.
mixed it up with on Saturday. I also wanted to ask you about Xavian Sorey out of Arkansas, who, from the practice film I was able to see, it just looked like his instincts were off the charts. I mean, he was flying to the football. He was where he needed to be all over the place. And similar to Auburn, I just found myself like watching Mike Washington and Xavian Sorey, and I know he didn't wind up coming out, but your guy Quincy Rhodes of Arkansas, I was just like, why were they 2-10? Taylon Green, like, very inconsistent player, very up and down, and that was on display when he got into the game on Saturday. But like a very talented player, I just found myself looking at Arkansas being like, how are you 2-10? Like, you have several guys who are going to get drafted during this year's, they're going to hear their names called during this year's draft. I don't get it.
Julian Neal at corner, he's going to be drafted. He was at the Senior Bowl as well, from Arkansas. But yeah, I mean, Sorey, he's a former 5-star guy. He was at Georgia for like 3 years, and he transferred to Arkansas, and he had a good year. He had almost 200 tackles over the last 2 years. So it's not like he was kind of nothing. But yeah, that Arkansas defense was rough to watch, and I think that played a part in maybe him going under the radar a little bit. But he is a guy that reads his keys and doesn't think twice. He goes, and you see him blow up blocks. The way he can take on a guard, a pulling guard, was fun to watch, and just kind of create those 10-car pileups at the line of scrimmage. So you see the effort, you see the compete skills. I think that he was graded as maybe a high-end, solid backup, that type of player. But he put his best foot forward at the Senior Bowl to say maybe I'm a little bit more than that.
I can't help but think about how one of my favorite linebackers in football went to Arkansas, a guy by the name of Dre Greenlaw. Not that we're going to put that on anybody who hasn't gotten into the league yet, but yeah, just, I don't know, just they were 2-10, but maybe that's not a reflection of the talent that they have, clearly, based on what we saw in Mobile. Among the DBs, I think we talked about Chris Johnson out of San Diego State heading into it. You can hit on him if you want to, but the guy I got to start with, bud, it was a theme. Like I said, the Duke Blue Devils. I'm standing up for my short kings here. Chandler Rivers, Senior Bowl weigh-in at 5'9", 185. So I can already tell you some teams are going to be out for pure sizist reasons. I don't give a damn. Guy is a baller. He contests everything. He didn't look overmatched in anything that I saw of him. Like, during the one-on-ones that I was able to see, he was mixing it up. He was getting the job done. And then he had several nice reps during the game. And maybe I'm biased because I am a short king myself, but I get amped about a 5'9" guy who is giving every bit as good as he's taking in Senior Bowl practices. It was very exciting for me.
You see the numbers, the measurables, you see him in person, and you're just immediately turned off. And then you watch him play, and you're pulled right back in. I mean, you're right there.
Yes.
Look, press man, okay, transitions cleanly. I love the way he annoys receivers. It's, he positions his body well, and so he can turn, find the football. He reads the quarterback well from depth when he's playing off coverage, so he can drive on throws. He's a missile and run support too. Like, he's small, but he plays so much more physical than you would expect for a guy that size. And now the lack of size does limit the margin for error in terms of him as a tackler, but he will go blow up a screen and he will throw his body around, no question about it. And talking to scouts, he's like he's kind of like a Boy Scout. He loves to be coached. The mental toughness is there. He's just all about the work. And, he's another, we mentioned this with Vincent Anthony, but he's another 4-year starter at Duke on that defense. A guy that since his freshman year kind of said, hey, I'm too good. I need to be on the field. And I think that you're right. Some teams are just not going to be, they're not going to be for him. He's not going to be for them because of the size. But when I look at the fluidity, the foot quickness, the way he can stay attached in coverage, the way he competes at the catch point, even if he does have fewer landing spots than other corners, there's a long NFL career awaiting this guy.
Give me the good football players. I don't give a damn. And sure, you're not going to draft a 5'9" corner in the first round. Maybe he'll have to wait a little while to hear his name called. Give me the good football players. I don't care. I'll make it work. We will find a role. He made some nice plays, but his attitude and the fearlessness with which he plays was apparent just from half a dozen reps. It just jumps out at you, and it was really cool to see.
And he never missed a game in college due to injury. So like this, yeah, he's a smaller guy, but he played like over 3,500 snaps in his career. Like the resume is really impressive. Leading the team in passes defended. So the production is there. I think the talent is there. It's just you have to make amends with how you feel about the size and be willing to overlook that a little bit.
Another guy I wanted to highlight, and this came up in the conversation we had with Drew Fabianich, who's the director of the Senior Bowl, heading into practices last week. Jalon Kilgore, which, yes, it's easy to draw this through line, and it's not fair to the guy, but it's hard not to look at him and think about the nickel who came out of South Carolina last year, who's about to play in the Super Bowl by the name of Nick Emenwari. And with the success that he's had, I think it would be crazy to think teams aren't going to be hunting for that type of player. And so you look at a guy who's 6'1.5", like just shy of 6'1". He played up at 217, but he was down at 211 for the Senior Bowl. He can play safety. He's done that before, but predominantly gave looks at nickel in these practices and looks like he's up to it. And when you see what the Seattle Seahawks have done this year and the way they have made it a pain on teams by not substituting out of their nickel personnel, this is a skill set that is going to be in high demand in this and subsequent drafts. And lo and behold, another guy coming out of South Carolina seems to have it. Or am I getting too far ahead of myself?
Well, and it's funny because Kilgore got on the field, I believe initially as a freshman because Emenwari got hurt. And so that kind of cleared a spot for Kilgore. And then when Emenwari came back, they moved him around. And I think that's really the main sell with Kilgore is the versatility. This guy, he was a receiver and defensive back and did a lot of things in high school. And then he goes to South Carolina and gets on the field immediately. He's a freshman All-American. And the ball production is what really stands out with him, where it's like double-digit passes defended every year, 8 interceptions over 3 years with the Gamecocks. Now, I don't think that he's not the physical marvel that Emenwari was. Few people on this planet are, but he that versatility that he brings, that the varying experience, that is something that I think is really going to help him. Now, I don't think it helped him stand out necessarily this week at the Senior Bowl. But I do think that once he gets to a pro camp and gets coached and they really give him one thing to figure out and worry about, I think he'll be able to come along. And so I don't see him as a second round pick like Emenwari was. But I do think that somewhere in the middle rounds. He's going to get drafted. He'll be a special teamer initially, and then somehow they'll find a way to get him on the defense and just find a way to use that size and versatility.
That's going to be the name of the game, and I think Kilgore is going to benefit from it. I think a lot of guys with that tweener sort of tweener is seen as a pejorative a lot of times, but I just mean like the combination of size and athleticism. I think teams are going to be hunting for it for the foreseeable future with what we've seen from some of these guys. Anybody else you wanted to highlight among corners? I've got one more name among safeties, but what about cornerbacks?
No, I mean, Chris Johnson, I want to mention him again because I thought he was the most consistent of the corners throughout the week. San Diego State, you see the size, you see the just how calm and controlled he is in his coverage. No matter what the receiver is doing, it does not affect how Johnson goes about his business. So he's one of my favorite players in this draft, and I thought he had a good week. Igbinosun was solid for Ohio State. You have to be okay with that. He's just going to grab sometimes. That's just who he is. I don't think you're going to coach it out of him, but you look at that speed and that length. It's going to be interesting after the combine what kind of buzz he has, because for a guy that's that size with those long arms and the way he's going to run and test, the buzz is going to be there. And so I'm interested to see just how early Igbinosun can go.
The safety I wanted to mention was Bud Clark out of TCU, which, go figure, the guy who had 15 collegiate interceptions got his hands on a lot of footballs at Senior Bowl practice.
First time I remember him is from the college football playoffs when they beat Michigan when he had a pick six against J.J. McCarthy. That was kind of the first time I really, he was really on my radar. And yeah, he had a lot more interceptions since then, including during Senior Bowl week, where you see the range playing, and whether it was as a post safety, whether he was playing more towards the box, more as a nickel and in coverage. You see the range that he plays with, and he has a nose for the football, no doubt. So he was the most consistent and top safety that I think we saw throughout practice.
Yeah, he got to TCU in 2020, which we've seen that over the years since COVID, guys being in school for a while. But in the time since he became a full-time starter over the last 4 years, starting with that season where they got to the national championship game, 15 picks and 20 PBUs.
It's all right.
So, yeah, I think you'll take a bet on production like that. One more guy I wanted to ask you about before we get out of here.
You kicker.
mentioned okay, a couple. No, we can hit the kicker. I was going to ask you about Kansas State safety VJ Payne.
Oh yeah. I mean, long rangey dude. Because he's every bit of 6'3", 210. Like and there are times where deep coverage, he struggles to hang on, but especially against tight ends, he can match up, and he is not. You can't shield him from the ball. He plays with quickness, and so it was a little bit of a roller coaster for him throughout the week. But if you just watch his highs, you see why teams are pretty interested in what he can bring. So yeah, I think Payne is. Maybe fourth round, I would guess, is probably where the average feedback is on him. Some are a little bit higher. I think maybe he can go in the third, some a little bit lower, but I think the average is right about the fourth round. And seeing the way he moves at that size, you can understand why.
No, I'm legitimately happy you mentioned the kicker, Drew Stevens out of Iowa.
He had a 50-yarder in the game, right?
He crushed a 51-yarder in crappy conditions, by the way. Like, it was cold and windy at the Senior Bowl. Go figure, Iowa's got a good kicker. So if you need one, maybe Drew Stevens is a name to know.
Yeah, I think that he'll be probably the top kicker drafted. We'll see how combine plays out. But yeah, he had a nice week. The BYU kid was there. He had a nice week as well. So I don't think we're going to see a kicker drafted in the top 5 rounds this year like we have in the past. But a few of these guys have a shot to get drafted late.
How could I have almost forgotten about the kickers? We're supposed to turn over every stone on Building the Beast. I'm glad we did. All right, Dane, that's going to cover us for this week. I'm off to Super Bowl, but there will be no interruption with the schedule. We will be back next week on the other side of things. So officially, next week's episode, there's no more football left for the 2025 season. So tell your friends, tell your coworkers. If you're looking for football talk, if you're looking for a reason to get excited about the draft, if you need to know what your team needs, we will be here all through the spring. We're looking forward to it. For Dane, I am Dave. We'll chat with y'all soon.
Thanks for watching. Follow The Athletic Football Show wherever you get your podcasts. And don't forget to subscribe on YouTube.